Okay. So, hi everyone. We welcome you to this talk organized by Women in Physics, Maths and Astronomy. That is the WiPMA group at IISER Mohali. We wish you all a very happy International Day of Women and Girls in Science. February 11th is celebrated every year as the International Day of Women and Girls in Science by the United Nations. This day recognizes the critical role of women and girls that women and girls play in science, and the purpose of celebrating this day is to create awareness to promote full and equal access to participation in science for women and girls. So before moving on towards the talk, I would like to take a few minutes to talk a bit about the WiPMA group at IISER Mohali. So we are a very young initiative and we started about 2 months back, and in collaboration with the Physics, Maths and Astronomy Club at IISER Mohali. This entire group came into existence after we noticed that there's a constant gender gap when it comes to majors in IISER Mohali. It started with a very one-on-one ratio in the first year, but then it started to skew down when it came to physics and maths in our third years. So that is where we felt the need for this club, and the gender gap was what that felt very intimidating to some of us, and so we started this group. So we felt the need to have a common group of women in these fields with whom we can talk openly, share our ideas or issues, and seek advice. And for this, we seeked help from the academic clubs in physics, astronomy, and maths, and the institute. And that is how the WiPMA came into existence. So sometimes we realize how much we need something only after we get it, and that is how that is what happened with our club. And we started with a very few people, 3 of us, and now we are a group of 40. So that's great. So I would also like to talk about Gati, the initiative that our institute is part of. Gati is short for Gender Advancement for Transforming Institutions. It is an initiative by DST that aspires to create aspires to create an enabling environment for equal participation of women in STEM fields at all levels, addressing the deep-rooted problems. This talk that we are having today is also helpful towards this goal, and hence is also a part of this initiative. So now coming to the talk's title is "She's on Her Way: Women and Science in India and the Developing World." I will briefly like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Shobhana Narasimhan. Dr. Narasimhan is a professor of theoretical sciences at GNCSR Bangalore. Her field of research is mainly in computational nanoscience. She has been a faculty member in the theoretical sciences unit of GNCSR since 1996. Before that, she was a postdoctoral fellow at Brookhaven National Laboratories, US, and the Fritz Haber Institute of Max Planck Society in Berlin. She received her doctorate in theoretical sciences from Harvard University in 1991. Her MSc studies were done at IIT Bombay in physics. Along with her research, she has been a fierce advocate of women in science. She has been involved with different organizations worldwide for the same cause. She has been a member of various institutions like Working Group for Women in Physics of IUPAP, the Standing Committee for Women in Science, and National Task Force on Women in Science. She's also been recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, for which we'd like to congratulate her. She has been conferred with various prestigious titles, including the Stree Shakti Samman Award and Kalpana Chawla Women Scientist Award by Government of Karnataka. She has been an inspirational figure to many who wish to pursue science. And I must say that we are absolutely honored to have you here, especially as our first speaker. And I'm speaking for many when I say that I cannot wait to hear your talk. So without further ado, the floor is all yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Smriti. Thanks for that very kind introduction. I'm not able to share my screen. You have to.
Yeah, just a minute. Yeah. I think you'll be able to do it now.
Okay. So, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Okay, so let's make this also small. So, okay. So I'm going to talk about, the title I gave was Women in Science in India and the Developing World, but my talk might be a bit more general than that. So before I get into my talk in particular, especially since a lot of you are young students and you've started this new group at ISA Mohali. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit about my journey and how I came to be, I guess, an activist about women in science issues. So I went to an all-girls school, and I never felt in my school that I couldn't do anything because of being female. I didn't think I would become a physicist. I didn't particularly like physics. And then I was in Maharashtra, in Mumbai, and in the 11th and 12th standard, I went to St. Xavier's College in Mumbai. And because of the rather strange combination of subjects I chose, I was put in a class with 4 girls and 75 boys. And that was not a very nice experience. Especially because after the first round of midterm tests, where I stood first in the class, most of the boys stopped talking to me. And it never occurred to me that they weren't talking to me because I did well academically. I just knew that nobody would talk to me, and I was very unhappy. Many years later, some of the guys told me that this is why they stopped talking to me, and they were now feeling bad about it. BSc was not so bad, but then I went to IIT Bombay for my MSc. IIT Bombay had 5% women, and I again found it very, okay, has the connection gone?
No, ma'am, you're still here.
Okay, it's blinking, so I don't know what that means. I found it a very strange experience, very, very sexist environment. I had very good teachers. I learned a lot of physics. I had very good friends, but I felt very, very conscious of being female. I felt that, you know, there was all kinds of nasty gossip swirling around the campus about the women. And it was the first time I think I really, really became conscious that it might be a disadvantage being a woman in science. Then I went to Harvard University for my PhD, and there I was in a class of 30, of whom only 2 were women. And that is where I really became more and more involved in women in science issues. And 2 of the women who were 1 year below me and we started a group called Women in the Mathematical and Physical Sciences, which is very similar to the group you have started at ISA Mohali. And over the years, I have sometimes been involved in these issues, sometimes not. Sometimes I would think, no, I should just concentrate on physics. I shouldn't get involved in all these things. But typically what would happen is something really bad would happen, either in the realm of women in physics or in the wider realm of politics or society, and I would get really angry about it. And then I would think I want to channel all that rage into doing something for women in science. And now I'm in a situation where I'm really quite involved in issues related to women in science, and it takes up quite a lot of my time and effort. So there are lots of things I can talk about today, but I asked Smriti what she would be interested in. And so I thought I'd just talk about these 5 topics today. Women are a minority in science, so I'd give you some statistics about that. Do women face discrimination? Yes, I think they do, and I'll tell you about that. Then, of course, importantly, some ways to combat this discrimination. Then I think a very important issue is women and self-esteem, so I'll discuss that a bit. And finally end by a discussion of whether things are changing. So women are a minority in science. This is a picture that many of you would have seen, especially if you are in physics. It's a very famous picture. This is a picture of physicists at the Solvay conference in 1927. People sometimes call this the picture of the brightest minds ever, because nearly everyone in this picture went on to win a Nobel Prize. But what's very noticeable is that there's only one woman present, and that is Madame Curie, who is over here. So in 1927, there were very, very few women in science. Okay, 100 years later, has things changed. This is a conference that I attended in 2010 in Shanghai. It's called the Total Energy Conference. And you see, things haven't really changed that much. Can you see me in this sea of men? Well, I am over here, and there's one other woman over here. So that's a little bit depressing that things haven't changed that much. So how is it around the world? This is a map of the world with the countries colored according to the percentage of women in their scientific workforce. The darker the color, the more women they have. And what you see is that most of the countries are colored very light. So they have a rather low percentage of women in the world, women in their scientific workforce. So here are some of the statistics. So in the world as a whole, it's 28.8%. But you see there are regional differences. So for example, if you look at Central Asia, it's almost 50%. Latin America and the Caribbean also, it's almost 50%. And these are both areas where most of the countries are not developed countries, economically developed countries, they're developing countries. Okay. And the Arab states are also doing pretty well. Where is it lower? East Asia and the Pacific. And the lowest is where we are, South and West Asia. And I don't know if that will surprise you, but it surprised me when I first saw these numbers. These are the numbers for Asia. The countries listed by the percentage of science researchers in that country who are women. Highest is Myanmar, that's Burma, with about 85%. India is almost at the very bottom. We have about 13.9%. The only country with lower than us is Nepal, which has about 7%. So that means Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, they all have higher percentages than we do, which quite shocked me when I first came across this statistic. This is in Africa. In Africa, you see a big range of numbers all the way from Tunisia, where it is a little bit over 50% of the researchers are women, all the way down to Chad, where it's just about 3% or something. And if you look at Latin America, then the numbers are pretty good. Bolivia has about 62%, and the least is Peru with about 32%, but that's still a lot better than India. Okay, so one thing that I've been doing is trying to dig into statistics, looking for correlations. This is something I do in addition to my physics work. So one thing I look for, because when I looked at these statistics, I began to wonder, is there any correlation between the participation of women in science and the wealth of a nation? Because especially people in economically developed countries, they tend to assume that they're doing pretty well compared to the poorer countries. And I wondered, is that really true? Who does better? And so I decided to look at the percentage of women in the scientific workforce. That's the statistics I just showed you, versus the per capita GDP, gross domestic product, adjusted for purchasing power parity. And when I plotted that, so, you know, as a physicist, it comes naturally to me to look and check if there are correlations. I was very surprised with what emerged. On this axis is the percentage of women scientists in the country. On this axis is its GDP, okay? And what I saw is I got a pretty good correlation with an inverted U-shaped curve, this sort of boomerang. So the poorest countries have very few women working in science. Then as the country's wealth increases, it goes up pretty sharply. But then after a certain point, it starts falling. So the richest countries, again, have very few women doing science. And this was very surprising, especially because if you look at women in the workforce as a whole, that is not just in science, it's well known that you see exactly the opposite thing. This is women in the workforce as a whole for all the countries. versus the per capita income, and you see this opposite U-shaped curve. So this means there's something in science which is very, very different from other forms of labor. So this is something we can discuss later. I don't know the answer yet, but I have some ideas, and maybe you will have some ideas too. And if I pull out from this data just the countries in Europe, I also found something rather interesting emerge. For the countries in Europe, there's this nice inverse correlation. So the richer the country, the fewer the women they have doing science. And I also separated out in the two colors the Eastern Bloc countries. These are the countries that were formerly part of the USSR or Yugoslavia, etc. So they were formerly communist or socialist. And these in red are the capitalist countries. And you see the communist countries have a much higher number typically of women in science, and the capitalist countries have fewer in number. Again, this is something we can discuss why that is so. I'll move on right now, but I'll discuss it later perhaps if we have time. The other thing, I looked at various other correlations. I'll just show you one other, which is I was interested in whether we can see trends and patterns of dropout and retention. So I looked at the percentage of women studying science at the tertiary education level, that is at the BSc level. What percentage of BScs in the country go to women versus the number I've already shown you, which is the percentage of women working in the scientific workforce. Okay, so here the blue bar shows the percentage of BScs going to women, and the orange bar shows the percentage of women working as scientists in that country. And this is for the economically developed countries, that is the very wealthy countries. And I see two patterns here. For some countries, which I've circled here in magenta, which is basically all the oil-rich countries of the Persian Gulf and South Korea, you see the orange bar is much lower than the blue bar. That means in these countries, there's quite a high percentage of women doing BSc. I mean, look at these numbers, 70%, 75% of BSc students are women. But then after a BSc, huge numbers of women drop out. And so the percentage of women working as scientists is very low. So in these countries, they're losing women after the BSc level. Whereas if you look at the other countries, which are here, you see the orange bar and the blue bar are similar. So even if people are not continuing in science after a BSc, that dropping out is at a similar rate for men and women. Okay, so that's these countries which I've circled in green. These are typically the European countries, Australia, etc. Now, what about the developing countries, including India, etc.? In most of these countries, you see that the orange bar is much lower than the blue bar. So in these countries, once again, like the Persian Gulf countries, you are losing women to science, to the scientific workforce after they have done a BSc. Of course, this is an exception. Moldova, for example, it's about the same height. So this means that the problems are very different in developing countries and developed countries. And that sort of makes sense. And it's also very interesting. It means in developing countries, the problem is not encouraging girls to study science at the earlier level. It is having them continue in science. And I think, let me discuss this in a moment. So again, in the US, they have what they call a leaky pipeline. So if they see the percentage of women in science at different levels, like you graduates, PhD students, postdocs, and then as you go up the academic pipeline, the percentage of women drops at every stage. Whereas in India, we have quite a different pattern, which I call the waterfall. So high percentage of science PhDs are women, but then very few percentage of working scientists are women. So we lose most women to the scientific workforce after a PhD. Why is this? A few people have looked at this. I mean, basically, we don't seem to have this idea in India that women cannot do science, which people, my classmates in the US used to tell me that they were told, women in the US, when they were studying in school, were actually explicitly told, oh, you're a girl, you can't do maths, you can't do science. I haven't heard that from so many women in India. I'd be interested to hear your experiences. But we have a strong feeling that our societal role should, it's not that we feel we're not intellectually capable of doing science, but there's a strong feeling that your societal role should primarily be that of a wife and mother. So after your PhD is typically when you get married and have children, and then these women face tremendous pressure, either from themselves or from their families or from the, people they know, whatever, to stay home and not work in science. Now, apart from that, do women face discrimination? So the question is there systemic discrimination in science? Do the processes and organizational culture of science result in discrimination against women? Now, many of you haven't yet started really working in science. You're still students. You may not have faced some of these issues. And by discussing them, I do not want you to get discouraged. But at the same time, I think it's important that we discuss these issues so that you become aware of them. Because in my generation, at least, many of us were not even aware of them. We didn't even realize when we were being discriminated against. Only much, much later, we looked back and realized that this happened. So I think it's much better to be aware of these issues. So there was this big survey a couple of years back called the Gender Gap in Science. So over 32,000 scientists from 159 countries were surveyed, and men and women, and they were asked if they had experienced discrimination. And men were 4.8 times as likely to say no as women were. So a lot of women feel that they have been discriminated against. So why is that? Now, there's some issues like, men publish more papers or whatever. I'm not going to discuss that today. But what happens if a man and a woman perform equally well? Are they judged equally? So this is a study that was done in Sweden. They looked at applicants for a grant for funding, and they took some objective measure of how good they were by looking at the number of publications they had, where they had published those papers, etc. And so they gave them a number, a grade based on that. So if on this number, it's supposed to be some objective measure of how good they are. And then they looked at the reviewers of the proposal, what score they gave them. And what score did they give men, and what score did they give women? And you see that regardless of this objective score, men were rated higher than women were. And incidentally, this is true even if the reviewer is a woman. And they found that women had to perform 2.5 times as well to get the same score as a man. And this is equivalent by their metric that they use to measure performance. You had to have 3 extra papers in a journal like Science or Nature. I mean, that is huge, huge. So that's asking something almost impossible of a woman, that to be judged as good as a man, you have to be hugely better. There was another study that was done where they gave the same CV to male and women professors. and ask them to evaluate the CV. They give them the same CV, but they put, in some cases, a man's name on the CV, in some cases, a woman's name on the CV. They ask them to grade it for competence, hireability, and whether you would mentor the person. In every case, where if it had a male's name on it, they gave it a higher rating than if it had a female's name on it, same CV. And similarly, how much they would pay, what salary would they pay this person, much higher salary if it was a man than if it was a woman. Why do people discriminate? Why do they have these biases? Of course, there's some people who are really bad, who just think women shouldn't do science, etc. But I think there are, what is much more common these days is what is called implicit bias. We all have these biases deep within us that we're not even aware that we have. And to tell you how common this is, I want to tell you a story about myself. So I think of myself as very liberal, very feminist. I don't think that there are things women should not do. I was brought up by parents who identified themselves as feminist. But one day I was flying in an aeroplane as a passenger, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, and she said, okay, so the pilot was a woman, and she said, "Hello, this is your captain speaking." And the first thought that crossed my mind for just maybe a fraction of a second was, oh my God, the pilot is a woman. I hope she knows how to fly the plane. And then I was really, really shocked. I thought, how can I have this thought? Where did that come from? So where do these thoughts come from? Okay, I think it's because we're bombarded by images and ideas and stereotypes from everywhere. So this is a picture from a school textbook for elementary school, an Indian textbook. And you see that, it shows various professions, and you see the only profession that a woman is shown doing is a school teacher. All the other professions a man is shown doing. And so without even being aware of it, we get these ideas in our heads. Now, challenges for women in science, when you're in a very great minority, you can feel excluded. Now, in my case, working as a scientist, I often feel excluded from after-work social gatherings where the men go drinking and they discuss not just social stuff, but they also discuss professional stuff. And so you get excluded from professional advancement because you're excluded from these social gatherings. And why you're excluded from these social gatherings? Either because they're not comfortable having a woman along, or because maybe you just have too many family responsibilities and you don't have a time to participate. If you're a student, also this can happen. For example, if you're very few girls in a class and a lot of boys in a class, sometimes women tell me all the boys get together and work together on homework assignments, etc., and the girls are left out. I hope this is not happening to you, but sometimes I do hear from girls who tell me that this is happening to them. Something that happens a lot, some people call it man-interrupting and bro-propriating. This was a famous case where Taylor Swift was giving a talk and Kanye West just grabbed the mic from her and talked. Now, this happens a lot, okay? I don't know if it happens to you in class. I remember when I was doing my BSc, I was in an electronics class, and the teacher was actually a woman. But repeatedly, what would happen is she would ask us questions. I would answer the question. She would completely ignore the fact that I had answered the question. And then a few minutes later, a male student would give the same answer to the question, and she would tell him, very good, good, that's the right answer. And I would think, but I just said that. Why did you ignore me? And that happens even now at my level. It happens at a conference, it happens at departmental meetings, etc. people either ignore women or they take your ideas and they present them as their own, and then they are given the credit. Women become invisible. And what do you do as a woman? You either keep up, you put up with it, and then you're meek and down. If you're soft spoken, people ignore you. Or if you become a little bit louder and more assertive to overcome this problem, then people start telling you that you're really aggressive. Okay, and then they dislike you. This is a picture of the President of India and the Minister of Science. It was taken in 2018 with the directors of IISc, all the IITs, all the ISERs. What do you notice about it? The first thing I noticed when I saw it was, where are the women? There's not a single woman. Okay. And they say that they're trying to change things a lot, but this fact still hasn't changed. Okay, even today, all the directors of the IITs, the ISERs and IISc, they're all men. If you may know that one of the acknowledgements that you've succeeded as a scientist is you get elected to a science academy. In India, we have 3 science academies. If you look at the percentage of fellows of the science academies who are women, it is still very, very low. In India, I think no science academy is above 10%. If you look at the Nobel Prizes, this data might be 1 or 2 years old, but in general, if you look at all the prizes that have been given in science, it's 3% have been won by women. If you look at the Bhatnagar prizes, which you may have heard of, they're considered the most prestigious prizes in Indian science. Again, it is 3%. 3% is, really, really, really low. Sexual harassment is something that is really quite prevalent. So in that same survey, which I told you, the gender gap in science, where they interviewed more than 32,000 people, depending on the field, so this is split up by field, between 20 to 40% of women said they had personally encountered sexual harassment. I think it's interesting that also men said they'd encountered sexual harassment, but the percentage of men is 2 to 5%. So it's much, much lower for men than it is for women. So clearly this is a problem. Okay. So now I want to talk about some ways to combat discrimination. You can raise awareness, call out bias and discrimination, build support networks, which is what you're doing in Isamohali, hold workshops, form alliances and associations, start targeted programs. What the government is trying to do consciously is increase the representation of women on committees and formulate new laws and policies. I mentioned to you that there's this implicit bias that we may all have. How do you find out if you have this implicit bias or not? So there's a group in the psychology department at Harvard University, which has tried to formulate an online test which checks whether you have this implicit bias. It checks for it in different fields, okay? And one of the things it checks is whether you think women should be doing humanities and men should be doing science, or do you actually feel the opposite? So if you go to this website, there's an online test you can take. It doesn't take very long. Do take the test, and I'll be interested to know what you come up with. I won't tell you how the test works. It's not exactly obvious. It doesn't just depend on what answers you give. Okay, so take this test. The first time I took the test, it bias quite strongly. Over time, I've taken the test a few times. My results are changing, but it might be because I've learned how to crack the test, so to say. Okay, we can share our stories as women. there are various books available in India and elsewhere where women share their stories. You might have seen this book called Leelavati's Daughters, which was brought out by the Indian Academy of Sciences, where lots of Indian women scientists share their stories. There's one for a slightly younger audience, a version of this book called The Girl's Guide to a Life in Science. There are books like this, which is meant for sort of more for schoolgirl level. It's stories of 50 women in science. There's a website that you can look at. It's called the lifeofscience.com. If you're not aware of it, do check it out, where it shares the stories of marginalized groups in science, which includes women in science. Now, you can call out what are called manels, okay? A manel is an all-male panel. Now, I don't know if you noticed this, but I've certainly become very aware of it, and others have too, that there are lots of conferences where every single speaker is a man. And you will be surprised, there may even be a workshop to mark women in science where all the speakers will be men. This may seem ridiculous, but it is true. Okay, so here, for example, there's some Digitech Conclave 1921, where, so many speakers, 25 speakers. And so how do we call them out? So there's this group called biaswatchindia.com, which has been working on this. So what they do is they first have established what they call a base rate in science. So they've looked at what percentage of the faculty in a given discipline in India are women. And they have found that in biology, it's the most, about 22.3%. That's still pretty low, considering that, people say, oh, biology is a women's subject. But it's still only 22%. And it goes down, down, down until you come to engineering, where it's 7.9%. Now, what their argument is that you would expect to see roughly the same percentage of speakers at a conference in that subject be women. And if you consistently see that it is lower than that, then it suggests that that conference is discriminating and not choosing women speakers. Okay, so they're on Twitter, for example, and here is a conference that they called out. They said base rate of women in biology, this is 23.2%. It's slightly different because I think it was taken at a different date. This number changes slightly over time. And in this conference, they had 0 out of 7 women speakers or panelists. So hopefully the idea is that you sort of name and shame them. And over time, people become aware of this and would not want their conference called out. How can you change this? You can change it by having women organizing conferences. For example, in that same series of conferences where I showed you where I was one of only 2 women in the audience. One year, I was one of the organizers. All the organizers were women. And we made sure that there were several women speakers. And we did this by not just, choosing women. The way the women get chosen is that you give a list to a committee that then votes on the speakers. And we just made sure that that list had several women. And then the committee chose based on only merit. And the problem was people were just not suggesting women's names in large numbers before. Or they were saying things like, oh, this woman as a young child, she won't be able to come, she won't be able to speak. And if you suggest women, they do come. There have been protests that have been effective. For example, in 2015, there was this conference on International Congress of Quantum Chemistry, and they put up their list of invited speakers and plenary speakers, and there wasn't a single woman, and people protested. And then they began to look really bad. And then they put up this notice saying, we hope that our premature posting, notice the words, of an all-male list will ultimately enhance public awareness of the pressing need for a better gender balance in science. We extend our sincere community. So they apologized and they revised their list in response to the protests. So protests can be effective. You all were asking me what kind of activities can you have to form a support network? Well, first of all, you form the group, which is very important. It's a very big positive step. You can have informal tiffin box lunches. They can be online or offline. That is, everybody brings their own lunch, their own tiffin box, and then you have a discussion while everyone's eating lunch. This is an idea that is perhaps American, where they call it brown bag lunch. Initially, when I went from India to the US, I thought, how can you have a talk while people are eating lunch? That seemed very disrespectful. But over time, I got used to it. You can have panel discussions. You can have scientific talks. You can have talks by role models. You can have career development workshops. I'll talk about that in a minute. Leadership development workshops, mentoring, outreach, twinning programs. You can twin your institution with an institution somewhere else. And there are internet databases that you can access. So these career development workshops are something that I have been organizing since 2013. I've been organizing them at the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste in Italy, which is a center which is meant to promote physics in the developing world. So if you're not aware of it, do look up its website. It mostly has programs in physics, but after I made this suggestion, they've also started having this program for women in physics. And we've also been doing a similar program. There's a new ICTP in Kigali in Rwanda. So we've been doing it there as well. So what these workshops do is they try to give women a space to share their experiences. It helps them acquire skills to rise in their career. And it helps them to form a community that can support one another. And the participants and lecturers come from all over the world, mostly from the developing world. So this is, for example, 2019, the countries that people came from. Now, people often ask me, why do you need these meetings only for women? Why should it be? It's regressive to have something only for women. I think there are many reasons why you need at least some meetings which are women only, which is, for example, one participant the first year I held the workshop, she told me, this is the first conference of any kind that I've attended. This is because this is the first conference my husband allowed me to attend. He allowed me to attend this one because I told him that only women would be there. And I was quite taken aback because it never even occurred to me till she told me this, that there are men who won't allow their family members to attend a conference if men are present. But then I realized that, women have all kinds of personal backgrounds, narratives, constraints, and you have to cater to all these women and help them to do the best they can within the constraints that they operate within. If you're organizing activities like this, I would encourage you to involve social scientists also. For example, two of my friends who helped me a lot in deciding how to organize this was Anuradha Srinivasan, who told me about something called a World Cafe format discussion, which is a way to organize a discussion so that everybody has a voice. And Maitri Gopal Krishna, she's a drama therapist. So she's a counselor. But she uses techniques of drama to help women cope with challenges they face, obstacles they face. I do think it's very important to involve men. I like this picture because it shows a single man surrounded by women, which is exactly the opposite of the situation I usually face in a physics conference where I'm a woman surrounded by men. I think it's important that we take the help of men who are supportive and we realize are not the enemy. And also, because we women are so small in numbers, we cannot change things by ourselves. We do need the help of men to change the landscape. We've had talks by inspiring role models. For example, this is Jocelyn Bell Burnell. I don't know how many of you know about her. She was the discoverer of pulsars, which are these pulsating radio sources. She discovered it when she was a PhD student. And her PhD advisor completely didn't believe her when she said she'd made this discovery. And she said, in fact, he gave her a very bad recommendation letter. She had a lot of trouble afterwards, even getting a postdoc position or a job. But then eventually they gave a Nobel Prize for this discovery and it went to her advisor and not to her. But now, many decades later, people realize a great injustice was done. And a few years ago, she was given the Breakthrough Prize in Fundamental Physics, which is a $3 million prize. We've had talks by other inspiring women. This is Setsuko Tajima, who's a condensed matter physicist from Japan. These are some of the women you might want to consider having talks by, actually. She had to quit studying after her master's because she had a child. And then just out of sheer love of physics, she used to go work in the lab 1 day a week for half a day while her mother-in-law looked after her baby. But after many years, the professor in whose lab she was working told her, you know, you have now got enough results that you can write it up as a PhD if you want, which she wasn't even thinking about. And then she got a PhD, and then she got a job as an assistant professor. And now she's not only a professor at the University of Osaka, she's the president of the Japanese Physical Society, and she has hundreds of publications. She's very well known in the field of high temperature superconductors. This is Rabia Salim Said, who came first as a participant to one of our conferences. She's from northern Nigeria. She got married after high school, and she had 6 children, of whom 2 were born with severe health problems. But she went on to do a BSc and an MSc and a PhD. And she's now a professor in the university in Kano in northern Nigeria. For those of you who don't know, northern Nigeria is a predominantly Muslim area where the Boko Haram are quite strong. So it's a sort of difficult situation in which to operate. She said something very interesting, I thought. Her advice for women was, be like a snail. She said, move forward slowly, 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 so that nobody even notices you're moving forward. When there's danger, retreat into your shell. And when the danger passes, come out and move forward again. And this made a big impression on me because it was so different from my philosophy of life, the way I operate. But I realized for women in certain circumstances, this is excellent advice. So she is somebody whom I admire greatly. What kind of soft skills can you acquire to go ahead in your career? You can learn how to write a paper, how to make slides, how to deliver a talk, how to get funding, how to pick a research topic. That's something very hard, I think. How to negotiate. You know, in general, they say women are very uncomfortable asking for things. We feel we don't deserve, we're not entitled. And we have to practice asking for things for ourselves, how to teach more effectively, how to make a CV, how to use social media. So this is a workshop where women are working in groups, improving each other's CV. This I wanted to mention particularly for you all because as students, I've noticed that students often don't have a very good idea how to make a professional looking CV. It either doesn't look professional enough, or there are things that are put on the CV which shouldn't be there, and things which should be there are not there on the CV. So it's a good idea to have advice on how to make your CV better. This is the drama workshop that I already mentioned to you. This is somehow a very strong, it has a very strong impact on the women who take part in it. They've actually found it quite a transformative experience. What do women take away from the workshop? They say that they find that we all share the same problems, regardless of our country, culture, or religion. I think that's an important realization to come to. To have confidence in ourselves, that's important, and I will talk about that more in a minute. And very importantly, to know that I'm not alone. And that's why these support groups are so important when we're a minority in science. We need to have these networks to support us, to know that we are not facing these difficulties all by ourselves. And this is a story from one of the workshops. This is Zipporah, who was from Kenya, and she knew she wanted to do a PhD, but she didn't have a problem identified to do her PhD, and she was kind of lost. And at one of our workshops, she met Aarti, who is a professor at IIT Mandi. And Aarti had many ideas for things to work on, but she didn't have enough people to carry out these ideas. And they met at this workshop, and they both started working together. And Aarti was effectively Zipporah's PhD supervisor, and now Zipporah got a PhD, and they've published many papers together. So these are the kinds of things that can emerge from activities like this. And this is a picture from at the end of one of our workshops. You can see everyone's very happy. This is me in the days before my hair became white. I think one thing I really realize in these pandemic days is that Zoom meetings are great. They're a great way to stay in touch. This is as participants from one of our workshops. That's me over here. We're just from all around the world, really. And we're just chatting over Zoom, supporting each other over Zoom. The other thing I've started in the last 2 years is all the women who were ever in my group, okay, as PhD students, postdocs, whatever, we all meet once in a while over Zoom, and we just share our experiences. We talk, we might just chit chat, we might talk about physics, we might talk about problems we are facing. And it's a great way, I think it's a great support for everyone. And many, many resources are available on YouTube, and I would urge you also to make use of them, like advice on how to make a CV, how to give a talk, how to perform on an interview if you're going to have an online interview for a PhD position or something. Make use of these. This is something that you may not yet need, but the Government of India has introduced various programs for women in science, especially having become aware of the fact that we're losing a lot of women after the PhD. They have introduced programs, they call these women scientist programs, which are meant to bring back into the scientific mainstream women who've had a break in career. You can either be in academia or you can be trained in something like patent law where a scientific background is useful. And they also have technology parks for women entrepreneurs if you want to start your own company, a startup. Smriti mentioned Project Gati. So this is inspired by something in the UK called the Athena Swan program, where the idea is that you rate institutions based on how gender equitable an environment they have. And the hope is that this will inspire institutions to get a good rating. They will work on making their environment more gender equitable. It's still at the pilot stage in India. We have to see how it goes, but I hope that it will help change the environment. Lobbying. What are the things you can lobby about? Raise your voice, ask for things. You can say if you feel you don't have enough women faculty, you feel women are not on committees, or if you feel committees should have student representation or conference speakers. If you feel that the language, like when I got the silver medal from IIT Bombay, the letter to my parents, the letter went to my parents, first of all, not to me. And it said, your son has won the silver medal. It was a printed form. They clearly didn't even think that a girl student could win a silver medal. And this is an example of gendered language. And we should protest this, I think. Okay, you should protest, of course, about sexual harassment, safety issues. If you feel you're in an environment that is not safe, I hope the new institutions have enough restrooms for women, but the older institutions sometimes don't. So all of these are things that you can lobby about. And when you're lobbying, please remember, it's always better to lobby as a group than as an individual. Your voice is heard more strongly, you have greater power, and also you cannot be targeted as a reprisal if you have a big group protesting rather than just a single person. I want to talk to you a little bit about women and self-esteem. So this is about schoolgirls. This survey was done in the USA. I looked for a similar study in India. I couldn't find it. At different stages, schoolgirls in the USA, schoolgirls and schoolboys were asked, are you happy the way you are? Is it true that I'm happy the way I am? So at elementary school level, the number of girls and boys saying yes was about the same. The percentage fell as they went from elementary school to middle school to high school, both for boys and for girls, but it fell much more sharply for girls. So there's something about self-esteem in girls that really drops as you grow older. This was also reflected in, they asked, I argue with my teachers when I think I'm right. Not many did it, but only 15% of girls did it as opposed to 28% of girls. And my experience is that it is true in India also, after years of teaching male and female students. They also asked them, they asked school children, they asked school girls, do you like maths? And most girls said they like maths. Then they asked them, do you think you're good at maths? And very few of them said that they're good at maths. Okay, huge drop. So it's not that girls don't like maths, they feel they're not good at it. How is it for boys? Again, a drop, but once again, not as big a drop. So there's really some issues around self-esteem for women. And there are all these issues also related with imposter syndrome, etc. So why do we have this low self-esteem? I think it's the attitudes and expectations of family and teachers. In India, we have this cultural feeling that it is bad to praise children. So people tend to be critical rather than tell you when you're good. And there's a tendency to give more weightage to certain kinds of accomplishments than others. And this I really feel, I don't know, I'd be interested to know what you think. But thinking about it, I've really begun to feel that as Indian women, we are raised to believe that our happiness is secondary to that of others. Our goal in life as Indian women is to make other people happy. And that would be fine if Indian men were raised to believe that their goal in life is to make other people happy. but I don't think men are raised with the same expectations. I mean, this is, of course, a generalization. This won't be true in every family. But if you're raised to believe that your happiness is not important, then I think your self-esteem will also suffer. Uh, Finally, last few minutes, I want to talk about whether are things changing. Uh, I've been talking about how so few of these big science prizes went to women. It has changed, I would say, in the last 5 years. So I'll just give you a few examples. This is Mariam Mirzakhani. She was born and brought up in Iran and then later worked in the US. When she was 17 and 18, she won the gold medal in the International Mathematics Olympiad. And in 2014, she became the first woman to win the Fields Medal. If you haven't heard of the Fields Medal, some people call it the Nobel Prize of Mathematics. It's very special because it's only given to mathematicians under the age of 40. Very sadly, when she was 40, she passed away of cancer. Then there's Karen Uhlenbeck, who won not the Fields Medal, but the Abel Prize, which is also sometimes called the Nobel Prize of Mathematics. The difference with the Abel Prize is that it's not given to just people under 40. It's given for a whole career, like the Nobel Prize. And in 2019, she became the first woman to win the Abel Prize. And she donated half her prize money to promoting women in mathematics. Incidentally, Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who I mentioned, who discovered pulsars, she donated all that $3 million that she won to promoting women in science and also to promoting the cause of refugees. This is Aditi Sen De. She's an Indian physicist at HRI. And till 2018, not a single woman had won the Bhatnagar Prize in Physics. And in 2018, she became the first woman to win the Bhatnagar Prize in Physics. You may know that right now there's this series, right? Rocket Boys, about Vikram Sarabhai and Vikram and Homi Bhabha. Well, we have rocket women too. So you might have seen them in the news a few years ago. This is Muttaya Vanita and Ritu Karidal, who were the project director and the mission director for Chandrayaan 2. In 2020, the Nobel Prize was interesting because of the 8 people who won the Nobel Prize for science that year, 3 were women. Who won it for developing this technique called CRISPR-Cas9, and Andrea Ghez, who won it for work related to black holes. And in 2021, what happened? Not a single woman won it, but so there were lots, but I still think it's very interesting that lots and lots of newspapers and journals like Nature, etc., wrote about the fact that not a single woman won the Nobel this year. And the fact that they're noticing it rather than saying, oh yeah, I mean, this of course is what you expect, I think that shows that things are changing. And what about committees in the government of India? So in 2016, I think something interesting happened. The MHRD, it can nominate 2 or 3 women to be on the governing boards, the executive councils of the NITs and the central universities, etc. And in 2016, they did something very interesting, which is all their nominees were women. Okay, so you will see my name there, etc., and many other women you will know. And so these governing boards and executive councils tend to be very often all male bodies. And by nominating 2 women to each of these NITs, they changed the composition of these bodies and made sure that there was a voice for women on these bodies. I can tell you stories about this if you want. And what about the percentage of women studying science? Changing very, very, very slowly. So this is in India, the percentage of women and the number of women doing BScs, graduates in STEM at various levels. So that is okay, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics together. So not just BScs. So you see the number, it is inching up very slowly. This is 2017, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. So it's going up, but at a very slow rate. So is this rate fast enough? So it's been estimated that in physics worldwide, if you look at the rate at which change is occurring, as people have estimated, it'll be another 258 years till gender parity is achieved. So we can't just let things happen naturally. We have to do something to trigger faster change. And in computer science in the USA, it's very interesting because the percentage of women has actually shown a steady decrease. And this is something we can actually discuss. So there are reasons to be optimistic, but there are also some disturbing trends. So we have to be very watchful and very proactive to make sure change occurs in the direction that we want. Okay, so I just wanted to end with a quote from Arundhati Roy. She said, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." And the last thing I want to tell all of you, especially the women, is stay strong and don't give up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was really amazing talk. I wish we could all clap for you at this point. So I would like to ask any participants they would like to have ask any questions, or if they have any comments.
Smriti, I think some of them are raising hands, so maybe you can turn on to the gallery mode so you can see them.
Okay, yeah. Okay, Alhat, I see your hand raised, so if you have any question, you can ask.
Yeah, I mean, I just have a couple of clarifications. Could you go back to the first graphs you showed us?
Which is the first graph?
The one where you compare the percentage of, I think it was PhDs versus the GDP.
Okay, 1 second.
Yeah, so is there any specific reason you adjusted for purchasing power parity in this?
It just seemed reasonable to me. I thought that is a more accurate GDP to use. I just thought that this is a reasonable thing to do. I didn't try it the other way.
Okay, and did you compare it against the per capita income?
This is per capita.
Okay, it's already per capita.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And in the, I think a graph a few slides after this, you were talking about workforce, scientific workforce. So does
This
that
is scientific workforce? All of these are scientific workforce.
right? So the scientific workforce just include academia, or does it also include women who are working in science in other industry fields?
See, it's a little bit unclear because these are UNESCO statistics and they've been accumulated differently for each country and they haven't given the details. So I'm not completely sure. I think there may be slight differences from country to country. So I tried to get that information and I couldn't get it. So this is a admitted weakness, but this was the only statistic I could find which had this number. So I had to use it.
I see, thanks.
Okay, can I stop sharing?
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had a question. Hi, Shobhana. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. So one of the questions I had was, I think Al had already asked it in some form. So I'll just say it. I mean, if the scientific workforce also included, let's say, postdocs, because in my personal experience, I did see a lot of women in certain fields in when I was at IIT Bombay doing postdoc, but then of course it did not reflect in faculty. So if the scientific workforce also included postdoc or not.
Yeah, so that's the problem. This UNESCO statistics say women employed in R&D. So it isn't very clear. And as far as I can tell, that does not include teaching, but it doesn't say about permanent jobs versus temporary jobs or postdocs versus faculty, etc.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask is, I mean, I'm well, as just as someone in science, I would say that there would be also policy decisions. I mean, how does one go around lobbying for policy decisions? For example, this 35-year age restriction, which when I was applying, I was quite surprised, and people I knew were also quite surprised that it stays the same for women as well, whereas women often do have breaks in their career.
So I mean, it's a little bit hard, but one thing I think one could do is raise awareness. Okay, so for example, one could write letters or articles in fora like the newspaper or Current Science. In my case, I happen to be on various committees. So I wrote an article, for example, in Current Science about this age limit issue. Then I'm on various committees where I repeatedly bring up this age limit issue. I think it is ridiculous both for men and for women that they have this 35-year age limit. Also, if you see, for example, the UGC says officially there's no age limit. This is something that I didn't have time to talk about, but maybe I should just mention it for the students who may not be aware of it. There is either unofficially or in some cases officially an age limit of 35 years to get a junior faculty position at most places in India. This especially is difficult for women because that is around the age when they tend to have children. And if they've taken off a few years to have children, then if they're measured against people who have not taken those few years off, then it's very hard to compete. And so this age limit is something that really hurts women. And I think one should certainly lobby against having this age limit. I also think it shouldn't be there for awards. For example, I didn't discuss it, but I put it on my slide that for the Bhatnagar, they have this age limit of 45 years. And I think this is also a strange thing to do and which can hurt women in many cases. Again, maybe because they've had some time off. And I think there have been some studies which have shown that women typically peak later in their careers than men do. And so an award that is age limited, again, will hurt women. But I must say that in many committees where I have lobbied for this, I have generally been opposed, sometimes by women. There was some committee which I was on where I recently suggested it, and a rather senior woman said, no need for all this. Lots of young girls are doing well these days, so why do you need to change it? And then it wasn't changed. So, but yeah, just raise awareness about the issue. Of course, one can also go to court. Maybe it's time people should consider that as well.
Ma'am, so why is there a limit at all? Like there is some issue like they put 45-year or 40-year or 50
yeah,
years.
that's what I agree. There shouldn't be. I think there shouldn't be an age limit at all.
Yeah, because like age is like just a number as it is.
Yeah.
And also just to mention hiring committees, I mean, the interview committees often have no women. So
see, when they there are advertisements I've seen which says should be under 35 or under. That you can fight. What is much harder is to change the mindset, because in many places, this is not put as a criterion, but the hiring committee operates with this criterion without announcing it. And that is much harder to fight, because you cannot prove that they rejected your application because of your age, but they have done it. And that is, I think, a much harder thing to fight.
So one last thing, I have one more question, sorry. So, I mean, what you said in the beginning, the data that you showed, which was also surprising. I mean, you said it was surprising for you as well, that in let's say US or Europe, or I mean, I'll add India to that for now, the number of women is much less. So have people looked at intersection? I mean, given that there are large groups like based on caste or based on race in these countries, which are already excluded from higher education. So correlation with that could be a major reason why.
I don't think people have looked at these questions of intersectionality, or if they have, they're just beginning to look at it. I haven't seen much of it. I think there've been maybe 1 or 2 studies of, like, for example, caste and in science education in India. I think there's this study by Ajanta Subramaniam, but beyond that, I haven't seen much.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
So I have a question on the, the statistic that a lot of women seem to be, even after doing the PhD, are not pursuing their career in science.
Yeah.
Is one of the reasons for that, is it like the way science works today, is it unforgiving on, a hiatus or something like that? Because especially that's the age where women end up having children, and then
I think that's certainly a big part of it. I have talked to some fairly senior scientists in India who are even considered rather liberal in their outlook, who have said you should never ever have a break in your career. And this to me seems absurd. They say, oh, science moves so fast that if you've had a break in your career, you can never recover from it. I don't agree at all, because, for example, people move into new fields all the time. And so I don't see why you can't just recover, as they say, from a break in your career. Lots of people will not forgive someone who's had a break in their career. Also, this program of the Government of India for, women who've had a break in their career, it's meant to get women back into the scientific mainstream. And so it gives them funding for a few years to work in some institution. But the idea is after that, they should be absorbed into the scientific mainstream. And that very rarely happens. It happens in some cases, but not at all in the numbers you want. And once again, I've heard people say things like, oh, not everybody needs to be a PI. As long as they're working in science in some capacity, that is quite okay. This was a man who was on a committee of the Government of India to promote women in science. So if you're hearing these kinds of opinions, it's quite hard, but one has to try to change, and one has to keep pushing.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Ma'am?
Yeah.
First of all, ma'am, I would like really thank you so much for giving us such a wonderful insight. Like, it really helped. When you were talking also, we were discussing in our group, like, these are the things that we are supposed to do, and the tiffin thing, and then the CV discussion. So we were all in the group also, like, it was really nice. And one more thing, like, I would actually like to tell is that, like, it's just my experience or opinion. Like, women, like, especially in India, like, as far as I know, in like my relatives or whoever I know, like
Khushi, your voice is breaking. I think there's some internet issue.
take up like
Kushi, can you
BSc. It's
repeat
just
what
like
you
a
just
degree.
said? I couldn't hear you.
It's not for because they are interested in, have to be educated. Oh, sorry. Just type it in the chat box. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
guess my
now your
internet
voice is
connection is
clear,
really
right?
unstable.
You can.
Okay. So I just
It
wind
went
up
bad
fast.
again.
Kushi,
I
again,
guess
we
you'll have
can't
to
hear
type.
you.
It's just that, you know,
Okay, I think we've lost her.
Yeah, she's typing, I think.
Okay.
So anyone else? Meanwhile, she's typing. Yeah, Alad, I see your hand up.
I mean, not exactly a question, but since there's a few faculty attending, is it possible to have some sort of seminars where we're at least introduced to these soft skills? Because I mean, a lot of the times you can get them from seniors, but that also depends on having a group of seniors who are interested in academia and also helps if they've done good in their academia applications, for example.
So
So
do you have a placement cell or anything like that?
No, ma'am. We have a placement cell, but that is in mind, keeping in mind people who are interested in going into jobs, not really for
Yeah,
people.
but can they also
going
organize?
to
Because so in our institute, I'm in charge of placement, and our placement group also organizes talks like this.
Okay, that's an interesting idea. We actually have academic clubs who generally organize such workshops, but they are again limited to the topics that will be more helpful to the people who are in the first or second year or third year. Because generally, people in their fourth and fifth year are busy with internships and applying to future places. But yeah, that's I think a good idea.
Yeah, so we had, for example, one workshop on CV writing. And in this one, we just had talks and discussions, but we had two people, one from India, one from the US, and both of them had experience of working in both academia and industry, who were talking about how to make a CV and stuff. And, you know, it was very, very popular. People said they found it very useful. But in the career development workshops where I work in, people actually bring in their CVs, and then in groups, we actually work on their actual CVs, trying to polish them up.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's definitely something we can start here as well. Like it happens in a very small capacity, but yeah, this could be a workshop type event.
And this is, of course, something sort of gender neutral.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason we do it for women is because we feel this is something that usually mentors help you with, and women tend to lack mentors, and that is why we do it for women. Okay, Kushi has said, it's just that women generally take a BSc not to pursue science, but just for a degree. Many of my relatives have just taken a BSc like that and later go forward to teach in kindergarten and stuff. What I'm trying to say is that the basic mindset needs to change, which is really tough. Okay, so first of all, that may be true, but if women don't want to go into science, I have no objection to that. You might want to encourage more of them to take science seriously. But my first concern is those women who would like to stay in science, who are really interested, but due to circumstances are not able to stay in science. So that's the group I would like to target first. So.
Okay, there was a previous comment in the chat. I'll just read that once. So this is by Sandhya. Hi, I refer to your talk off and on, and I really enjoy hearing the clarity of thought that you have. Will you talk about how merit and equality is viewed? And if you have any resources in that area, can you share? The longer papers versus more papers that you mentioned is something in that direction.
Yeah, so this comment is about something I had said. She had heard me talk at TIFA once before, and there I had mentioned something about how people have said that women tend to publish fewer papers than men, but they tend to write longer papers than men. And so if you have some way of evaluating just based on number of publications, women suffer. And they don't take into account, the metric should not just take into account how many papers you've published, etc. So I will try to find the reference for it and send it to her.
Also, ma'am, if you could send your slides, they would be really helpful for us in general.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Anyone else wants to ask anything, wants to tell?
Hello.
Yeah, Prajakta.
Yeah, ma'am, I just from your slides, just one thing caught my attention in very particular. In that slide where there are plots about how many percentage of women researchers is there in each country. So what caught my attention was the percentage in Myanmar of women researchers was 85%.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a very huge number. And is there any particular reason, any programs there are?
Of course, this is very interesting. Now, I don't know too much about Myanmar, but I tried to look up a little bit articles on the web to try and understand what is happening in Myanmar, why it is so different. And I suspect from what I read up that the reason isn't a very good reason. It seems like these academic jobs are very poorly paid in Myanmar, and that is why men don't go into them. So it's not necessarily a positive thing that they have a high percentage of women. In fact, men don't even go in for higher education in Myanmar. So they actually have reservation quotas for men to study. They're trying to encourage men to study in Myanmar. So I don't know too much. I have never met a scientist from Myanmar, so I couldn't ask anybody or anything. But from what I looked up from the sources I could find on the web, and this may be true in many countries, okay? Many of the rich countries where we found that the percentage, sorry, not the rich countries, the middle income countries where we found the percentage of women in science is high. It might be that those are the countries where science is not very financially rewarding and therefore men don't go into it. I do not know. I mean, this is something that obviously needs to be looked into further, and I would like to do it. I've been talking to some economists about whether we can look into it further. Mine was just a preliminary study, and the findings that came up were quite startling, and I want to look into this issue more.
Okay, I mean, that is the reason behind it is even more
depressing.
Yeah, and not depressing, but shocking, more shocking than the data itself.
Yeah.
But I again wanted to ask in the continuation that if this reason is correct, that these academic jobs or fields are not well paid, and that is why men don't tend to go into them. Is it just that men, I mean, from what I feel, it seems unintuitive for women to go into some field that doesn't pays well. I mean,
yes, but it may be that if men don't want those jobs particularly, they don't particularly care if women get those jobs.
Oh, right.
But I mean, I don't want to say something nasty about men, but that's my understanding of the situation.
That makes more sense. Yes. Thank you so much.
And it would also be families, right? What do families want their children to go into? Like families, like, see, I also knew, like when I was a student, I really wanted to do physics, and nobody objected to my doing physics. I had a male friend who really wanted to do physics, and his family wouldn't let him do physics because they said, oh, you're not going to earn a good living doing physics. And they forced him to do computer science. So it's not just what men want to do or women want to do, it's also what their family wants them to do. So there's a lot of pressure for men to go into fields which are financially rewarding, but people may not care so much what their daughters do because they don't see their daughters as being primary earners.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, any more questions, comments, anything?
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask if it is okay for the participants to write to you regarding this talk, any doubts or any follow-up questions if they have. Is it okay to write to you?
Yeah, of course, it's okay to write to me. Sometimes I get terribly busy and I don't reply. And please don't be offended, just persist and do mention that you heard me give this talk, and don't get offended if I don't reply. It's not that I'm being snobbish or something. Sometimes it just gets a bit overwhelming. I get overwhelmed by things and I don't reply. And I will reply if you keep reminding me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, any more questions anyone has? Okay, so may I request if people can switch on their videos once and we can take like a screenshot and commemorate our first talk. It was a very nice session.
I'm very flattered to be asked for your first talk.
It was a great experience, and I'm already seeing the pings on my WhatsApp, people texting me. So it's been a great experience for a lot of people.
So do let me know what events you'll conduct in future, and
yeah, sure, ma'am.
How your group evolves.
Yeah, sure. We'll keep you updated.
This is possibly the closest we can go to an offline talk.
Offline talk, yeah.
So it is nice.
Need to go to gallery view, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so smile, everyone.
Seshna, you were very quiet. You didn't say anything.
Well, I have to confess, I had to step out a little and I sort of speak back in, but I really liked it. Yeah, anyway, I mean, the people here know me and have, some of them have been taught by me. They can always ask me. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll have a photo, group photo. So smile, everyone. Okay, yeah, one more. Just a second. I got okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. You can switch off your videos now.
Send me the photo, okay?
Yeah, I'll send you. Okay, I think with this we end our session. Thank you so much, ma'am. And it was a lovely session and a lovely, thank you for being our first speaker. That was like a big deal for us. And we hope we have many more interactions with you, and hopefully next time when we meet you, we are a bigger group and we have had much more interactions with each other and we can have a better discussion.
Thank you so much and all the best for your group.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for coming. Thank you everyone for coming. It was a great session. And we'll keep you updated on our Twitter about the recording and the slides. And if you want to contact any one of us regarding questions, or if you want to join the group or something, so you can contact us directly. Our numbers are on the posters. So from there you can contact us. And thank you so much for coming today for the talk. Okay. So I guess with this we end the talk.
Okay,
Thank you,
bye.
everyone.